Lots to discuss here in the booth, but first we should say that joining us now is Chad Wolf, former acting head of the Department of Homeland Security in the final years of the Trump administration. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
And first I want to draw on your DHS experience because we learned today that Donald Trump's Secret Service protection had actually been increased prior to his Saturday rally due to what authorities say was an unrelated threat from Iran. So it was actually his enhanced security that failed on Saturday. What questions do you want answered as this investigation unfolds?
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions, right? Questions regarding resources, questions regarding the handoff to local or state law enforcement. Whose responsibility was it for that structure where the shooter fired from? What was the force posture of the service and his detail? Did they request resources? Did they request more technology? I think all of that's going to come out in the investigation. And I think the American people really want to understand what went wrong here because, look, the response when you saw his agents dive on him and protect him and then obviously usher him out, great. But that's response, right? A big part of their mission is preventative. And that's the part that failed and really failed in a really epic failure. So I think the American people want to know what went wrong here.
Well, on that point, is the Secret Service, in your view, is it stretched too thin? Was this a systemic failure?
Well, the service, just like other elements at DHS, both operates from a budget and also operates trying to hire law enforcement officers. And so every federal agency that is trying to hire law enforcement officers has a challenge there. We've just seen the numbers over the past several years not be as high as they once were, both from a recruitment and retention standpoint. So they have challenges just like anyone else. And so when you have a very active former president and you have a big first family that requires a lot of protection for a lot of different principles, you're going to see their resources stretched thin. So absolutely, I think that's part of it. But they still have a job to do. They have a responsibility to do. And just because you're stretched thin, that's not really an excuse.
Related to all of that, as I'm sure you saw, we've now seen Homeland Security and the FBI issue a bulletin to law enforcement basically warning about copycat attacks in the wake of all this, right? And we know, as you well know, about this heated political environment, about the kind of rhetoric that can fuel real-world violence. How worried are you about more of these kinds of attacks on political leaders? And also, what do you think leaders in this moment, including speakers here on the stage, need to do to tamp down the political temperature? What do you want to hear from them?
Yeah, so the bulletin is... that doesn't surprise me. We see that a lot from law enforcement. When you have a big event, they're always going to be worried about copycat crimes of nature. I didn't see anything in that bulletin that was very specific, so I don't think it's specific intelligence. I think they're just concerned, and we see that after big, large events or incidents occurring. Look, I think, and we've heard it here, and we've heard it from President Biden, everyone needs to take the temperature down a little bit. I think that would be good for all sides. I think when you have language that talks about threats to democracy or equates someone to a mass murderer like Hitler, which we've seen in the past, I think that starts to fuel people, right? And I think some folks will say, well, that's just, that's politics. Well, not everyone reacts the same way. And so I think I think all sides should take the temperature down a little bit. I'd love to talk about issues. We should focus on issues and the vision for America, right? That America First approach that President Trump had for 4 years, and obviously he's campaigning on again. I think those are the issues that most Americans really care about. The economy, how it impacts their pocketbook, the safety and security, not along the border, but also in their communities. I think these are the issues that they really, really do care about.
So on the issues, we know we're going to hear a lot about immigration tonight. We've heard a little bit already. It was a huge part of your portfolio leading this key agency. We've now seen numbers drop dramatically at the border in the last few months. We were seeing record highs after Title 42 lifted, the COVID era, pandemic restrictions. We've now seen June numbers at about 130,000. Those are the lowest since January of 2021. We know President Biden's taken a lot of heat for a lot of the restrictions he's put on the border from his own progressive wing. Is credit due here to President Biden for bringing down these numbers as dramatically as he has in the last few months?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. The Border Patrol numbers that you cite, I don't disagree with you. Those numbers have dropped. But what the other side, or what they're not telling you, is that the numbers at ports of entry have increased dramatically, over 8,000%. And so you have more and more folks that are inadmissible between ports of entry, but they're being routed to ports of entry. And so they're moving that influx of folks just to a port of entry, and so the numbers don't capture those. They also don't capture the number of folks being flown into American communities under the parole system that they've put in place. So you really have to take a look at the nationwide numbers, which are a bigger number than the subset that you cite there. That's just Border Patrol numbers. If you look at the nationwide numbers, they're still astronomically high. And we've seen something during the Biden administration that we've never seen before through the use of the CBP One app, where people come into those ports of entry, and the use of parole, where they fly them in from 4 different countries into the United States. We've never seen that before. And so you need to take all of that into account when you're trying to understand the influx of folks coming into the country.
Do you have numbers around that when you say they're astronomically high? Do you know what we're talking about?
Yeah, so at ports of entry and the parole. So the parole, they've paroled upwards of about 500,000 folks into the country.
You're talking about folks who are coming in from those countries they have agreements with to say we'll take up to this many people who apply in advance before arriving here. Is that
right.
correct?
From Haiti, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela are the 4 countries that they're paroling individuals in. At ports of entry,
they would argue those are legal pathways, however. That's a legal means of arriving in the United States.
That's being litigated at the moment. I would say it's very unlawful, the use of the parole system that they're using. That's supposed to be on a case-by-case basis for the public benefit or for national security reasons. None of those actually fit, or those 2 definitions don't fit the number of folks coming into the country.
Sure, but
they just don't.
You disagree on the policy, I understand.
I do.
Yeah.
I disagree with that, and the use of that CBP One app. The CBP One app doesn't ask any asylum questions, but yet they're allowing folks to come through ports of entry to allow to come into the United States and then seek asylum.
Well, the CBP One app grants them a chance to meet with an asylum official. It doesn't necessarily grant them entry, correct?
It allows them to come into the United States to meet with the USCIS officer, yes.
Right. But that doesn't mean that they're allowed to stay. I mean, the other thing the Biden administration will point to put the numbers to you is that they've now deported some 4 million people over the course of their administration.
Well, what that tells you is that they are allowed into the United States to meet with an asylum officer, and if they meet a very low credible fear standard, they're released into American communities. And so that's the end goal. As far as deportations or removals, those numbers that they cite are actually returns. So returns are if you can return someone as they cross the border, which is, again, important. But removals are actually removing individuals from the interior of the country. So that's what ICE does. And those numbers are at historic lows. And I think that's what most Americans are concerned about. All these folks being released into the country, when they do have their time in court, if they go to court and they are being ordered removed, they're not leaving. And so the removals from communities like New York, Chicago, Denver, Dallas, Houston, those are removals that are at an all-time low today.
That bipartisan bill in the Senate that was shepherded by Senator James Lankford, it would have strengthened asylum laws. It would have forced the president to shut down the border at a certain point. It also would have ended catch and release. And yet President Trump, according to all the reporting, basically killed it because he wanted to be able to campaign on the problem of immigration. Was that a strategic mistake on his part, policy-wise?
Yeah,
set the politics aside.
So I appreciate that. I would disagree with the way that you characterized that bill. It did not end catch and release. It did not it didn't do any of that. I took a look at it. Look, I'd been asked to talk about that bill for a long time. You need to comment. You need to comment. I said, I'm going to wait until I actually see the legislation. And I did that. And when I read the bill, I said, this has got a lot of problems. It's an untested system. We'd never seen, they started in that bill is a variety of new things that you would try to do to adjudicate asylum claims. Instead of actually just enforcing the law, let's go back to the law that's there, enforce it, hold people accountable. That bill created a structure I didn't think was going to be very effective. It wasn't going to end catch and release. It wasn't going to do a variety of different things. And so I was against it, not because President Trump was against it, because operationally I knew that that wasn't going to work.
At the same time, can I just point out, though, that would have added, the bill would have added hundreds of Border Patrol personnel, and we know they've been vastly understaffed. It would have added hundreds, dozens rather, of the surveillance machines at legal ports of entry, where we know the fentanyl has been making its way through en masse. I mean, these are the kind of things that Customs and Border Protection have been asking for, right?
Oh, sure. I don't think you can be against either agents or technology. But if you're going to hire more Border Patrol agents, which, by the way, that's an 18-month tail.
Right.
That's not going to happen overnight. That's 18 months by the time you authorize the money and you start hiring them till you get them on the line, 18 months. But if you're still going to simply have them process illegal aliens as they come into the country and you're not trying to deter it, then you're not actually solving the problem. You're just putting more resources to the problem, which is just processing more and more individuals. You have to deter them and put some deterrence measures in place to stop the flow. Otherwise, you're never going to get control of the situation.
Taking your point about what's operationally effective, when the former president talks about mass deportations, how would that work? How is that operationally effective?
It's going to be a challenge. I've said that from day one. I think anytime that you're trying to remove anyone from the country, you first have to target them, you have to locate them, you have to have officers go out, put hands on them, remove them, detain them, put them on the flight line, and then actually repatriate them back to their home country. All very difficult, but that's not to say that you shouldn't try, and that's why we have ICE. ICE has a ERO office, Enforcement Removal Officers. That's all they do. That is their entire job in life, and we should allow them to do their job, and under the Biden administration, they're simply not doing it, and the numbers bear that out. It's DHS's own numbers. So I would say let's get back to letting them do their job. There's 1.5 million individuals here that have a final order of removal, which means to say every immigration judge they've seen has said you don't have a legal right to be here. All those individuals need to either voluntarily depart or be removed, because that's what our law tells us to do.
We know another issue of great importance right now, election security, falls under Homeland Security as well. And I just wonder how you view this moment right now. We just had an election carried out in which all the relevant agencies said it was the most secure election in modern history. What's your message to folks out there who are starting to cast doubt on what these election results could be coming up?
Well, I would say it's every American's right, I would say duty, to vote. I think a lot of folks are obviously concerned about election integrity issues from the previous election and from the COVID pandemic. We saw a number of different changes during that 2020 election. Some of those are still in place, some of them are not. States have changed some of those measures. I would say, again, continue to vote. I think there's been a lot of work to try to secure our elections more from a DHS perspective. And I like to be very clear about this. DHS's role in election security is very, very straightforward.
Yeah.
It's making sure that we eliminate foreign adversaries from participating in our elections or trying to influence our elections.
And how high is your level of confidence in our ability to do that now?
I don't have the intelligence these days, so I don't see what the department sees and what the secretary sees. I don't see any public reporting that says that they are actively doing that on a scale that I would be concerned about. I'm sure they are still doing it. From what I saw when I was at the department, they are doing this almost daily. Whether it's an election year or not, they're always trying to influence. But I haven't seen any public reporting that would give me a lot of concerns from a foreign influence perspective. Now, when you talk about voter rolls and you talk about what occurs in elections, that's nothing that the department has responsibility or jurisdiction over. Obviously, that falls at the state level, but also with the Department of Justice.
It's the former acting head of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate your time.